passport privilege. Those who have it don't think about it. Those who don't can think of little else. You are either blissfully unaware or painfully too aware. There's really no in between. In the last video, we talked about how banks think. We talked about the difference between your money and the bank's money. We talked about how credit is borrowed trust. And we talked about how your personal credit score, built slowly over months and years, determines what systems will open their doors to you. Today we're going to zoom out, because everything we said about personal credit, it also applies to entire countries at the national level. To quickly recap, your personal credit score is assigned by a third party. Banks are lenders, but banks trust information from national credit bureaus. Those credit bureaus consolidate all your information, and based on your history of borrowing and repaying, they deem you trustworthy or untrustworthy, and then determine your cost of borrowing. The common trope is that time, discipline, and deliberate action can elevate anyone into a perfect credit score. And yes, it's important to believe it because that's what we can immediately control, but we must be well aware that an inescapable part of credit is past you, as well as past you. Past you follows current you like a permanent shadow, and both together in concert heavily dictate what future you can do. The same logic, the same structure, and the same consequences happen with a sovereign credit rating. It's just scaled up to an entire country. There are three agencies that dominate this space: Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch. Think of them the same way you think of credit bureaus that track your personal score. But instead of tracking individuals, they track nations. They assess a country's ability to repay debts. They assign a rating. And that rating tells the world, is this country going to pay me back? Is it safe or is it risky to lend money to this country's government? At the top of the scale, AAA is the highest possible rating. It's reserved for countries with the strongest institutions, the most stable economies, and the deepest track record of paying individuals and countries back what they owe. There are around 200 countries in the world, and as of 2026, there are only 11 countries that have a AAA rating. So, I'm not saying these are perfect countries, but their repayment histories basically are. Think of countries like Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland. If you are an individual buying government bonds, you can safely buy government bonds from these countries, and it's essentially guaranteed money that it will come back to you. And on the flip side, there's the other end, right at the bottom, D. D for default. These countries and their governments have chosen and have actively chosen before not to pay individuals who have bought their government bonds. You can do with that information what you will. But here is where all of this connects directly to your life. We like to believe that each person has personal agency. But while nobody gets to choose the country of their birth, we still inherit equally our country's credit rating. And that affects us every single day. A country with a strong credit rating can offer government bonds at low interest rates and still raise tons of capital. We call this borrowing cheaply. Cheap borrowing means that capacity to invest in long-term things like infrastructure, education, and institutions, they compound in a virtuous cycle. Inversely, a country with a weak credit rating borrows expensively, and so expensive borrowing consumes more and more of every tax dollar, which goes to servicing debt instead of building up the country. And this traps the country in a vicious cycle. Two cycles, one virtuous, one vicious, neither chosen by us as individuals, but the reality is that even if you can look up your country's credit rating on Wikipedia, by yourself, you probably can't do very much on your own to change anything. Your country's credit rating is, simply put, either your burden to bear or your privilege. Let's talk about some actual examples and show you what it looks like in practice. So, in 1965, Singapore was involuntarily ejected from the Malaysian Federation. Singapore had no natural resources, no hinterland. It was a tiny island at the tip of the Malay Peninsula. Lee Kuan Yew wept on television, and that was the very first night where independence was announced. What happened next? Aggressive anti-corruption enforcement, mandatory savings, English implemented as the language of government and commerce, strategic courting of multinational corporations. In Singapore, the rule of law was enforced, and that had a huge impact on the national credit and the national credit story. 1965 was then. 2026 is now. And if you mentioned and remembered before, Singapore holds one of those coveted 11 country spots for that AAA credit rating. Singaporean citizens can travel to 195 countries around the world visa-free. The Singaporean dollar is one of the most stable currencies in Asia, and its banking system is trusted globally. Furthermore, countries are open to Singaporeans coming to visit their nations because they know that Singapore has such a high standard of living that Singaporeans and many other people around the world would struggle to find Singaporean standards of living anywhere on earth. There's really no risk to letting a Singaporean visit because there's pretty much no risk of a Singaporean overstaying, and instead Singaporeans, by coming over, will bring their purchasing power and inject their tourism dollars in as well. There are no resources to this country but pure institutional credibility that was built deliberately over time and in a very short space of time, over one human lifetime. The strongest passport in the world was born. There's a flip side. Let's talk about Argentina. Argentina has defaulted on its sovereign debt 9 times. 9. Most countries have defaulted 0 times. Greece defaulted once in 2012, and it was treated as a civilizational crisis. Argentina's done the same thing 9 times. In 1900, Argentina was one of the 10 wealthiest countries in the world on a per capita basis. Buenos Aires was called the Paris of South America. But what has followed is one of the most studied cases of institutional decay in economic history. Cycles of populism, military coups, hyperinflation, debt accumulation, default, partial recovery, repeat. The 2021 default was at the time the largest sovereign default in history. Argentinians, overnight, middle-class Argentinians, had their savings wiped out. The peso, pegged 1-to-1 to the dollar, collapsed. People banged on the doors of banks that had frozen their accounts. 5 presidents came and 5 presidents went. All in 2 weeks. Today, the Argentine passport opens 90 countries visa-free. Singapore opens 195 countries visa-free. Argentinians are not less talented. Argentinians are not less educated. Argentinians don't work less hard. But because their nation's institutional credit history makes other countries nervous, it seeds questions like, will these citizens overstay their visas? by overstaying their visas, they burden our social welfare system. Will these citizens be incentivized to return home? Do they have stable jobs and stable opportunities to return to? And do these citizens, by coming to our country, do they bring tourism dollars and purchasing power that outweighs all of these risks that we mentioned? Once these seeds of doubt are planted, it is incredibly difficult to remove them, and it's proven that over 100 countries on Earth have decided, no, it is not worth the risk. Individual Argentines, they didn't do anything wrong. They are simply carrying the accumulated weight of decisions made for them before they were even born. And that's the difference between personal credit and sovereign credit. Your personal credit, you can fix it. You personally. Apply for credit early. Pay on time. Pay on time, over time, and build up your credit history. Your credit score, your personal credit score, it will improve. But your country's credit rating, you don't choose it. And for the most part, you cannot directly change it. But still you carry it everywhere you go. You see it in your passport. You see it in the stability or the volatility of your country's currency. The boring remarks about your government's borrowing plays and government bonds is directly linked to the institutional trust that foreign employers, foreign landlords, and foreign lenders will extend to you and other people with your passport, with your face, even before you open your mouth. So what can you do? You're just one person. You cannot change your country's credit rating, but you can understand it. And you can factor it into your future decisions. Look for trajectories. Not just where a country is today, but where it is likely heading. Singapore in 1965 looked like nothing. Who would have guessed that 60 years on they would hold the strongest passport on earth? And on the other side, in places like Argentina, when things were collapsing, when cycles were repeating, there were people who saw ahead and they kept their savings, also in Argentine pesos, but also in the US dollar, also in Uruguayan banks, also in Miami real estate. It's not disloyalty. It's grand arbitrage. So listeners, look at your own country and look up your country's credit rating and decide for yourself, what can I build here? And take steps to further your personal credit. At the same time, continue to monitor your country's trajectory and ask yourself, do I trust this? Do I still need further optionality still? And for me, what is the easiest step to build optionality from what I have already inherited? Again, your personal credit is the score you can personally mold, and your sovereign credit is the score that you inherited. Understanding both is where true optionality begins. This is Grand Arbitrage, and I will see you in the next one.